I think we've all agreed we're ready to get this started. Woohoo! It is really wonderful to see this room so full. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Amy Dunham-Strand, Director of the Jane Hibbert Idema Women's Studies Center here at Aquinas College. And on behalf of the Women's Studies Center and the Contemporary Writers Series, a very warm welcome to our co-sponsored evening with best-selling author Angeline Boulley. We are so glad you are here. This event brings together two missions of two stellar AQ programming initiatives. Thanks to two generous alumni benefactors, Dr. Tony Foster and poet Linda Nemec Foster, the Contemporary Writers Series, which is now in its 26th season, engages our campus and West Michigan with some of the world's most acclaimed contemporary poets and writers. Likewise, thanks to a generous endowment gifted by Twink Fry and James McKay, the Jane Hibbert Idema Women's Studies Center is a community resource for women's and gender issues to empower students and community members to advocate for gender equality and social justice. Please check out our respective websites for past and future events like this one, and come back to our campus next spring, I mean. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders. Please turn off your cell phones. Please, no video recording or flash photography. But please do join us afterwards out in the atrium for a book signing with our author. You may get your book autographed, and if you don't have a book, our bookstore is on hand to sell you one. So now to introduce our speaker, AQ Senior Ashley Rodriguez.
Ani, hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you once again for joining us on this honorary and special day. As Amy mentioned, my name is Ashley Rodriguez. I'm a student and an intern for the Jane Hibbert Idema Women and Gender Studies Center. Before I further introduce our phenomenal guest speaker, I would like to read a land acknowledgement that was put together by the Mary Wood Dominican Sisters of Grand Rapids. The Dominican Sisters foster a commitment to a lifelong learning dedicated to the pursuit of truth and common good. Today in this space that we have been given the opportunity to read a land acknowledgement that represents and recognizes Native people who were made invisible through political policies, structures, wars, boarding schools, and other exploitation-based hardships. So it is as followed. It is fitting that we here at this gathering acknowledge this Aquinas campus of our Marywood campus as gifts of the Great Spirit's creation in the ancestral home of the Anishinaabe, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi tribal peoples of the Three Fires Confederacy. These indigenous tribes lived on, built a relationship with the earth, and cared for the creation's gifts. Land acres now known as Michigan were stolen from indigenous peoples through misunderstood treaties, broken promises, and forced removal. We apologize for these wrongs and prayerfully support and value Native American peoples and their homeland. We desire to build a relationship with indigenous people in our community. We benefit and appreciate to pray, study, minister, and live in community on this holy ground. We strive to grow in awareness of our debt to Native peoples past and present. So thank you once again, Dominican Sisters, for your carefully thought and powerful acknowledgement that you've allowed us to share today. Now, I also have the honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker, storyteller, phenomenal contributor to our society, and a member of the Bear Clan, Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians and Ojibwe community in Michigan Upper Peninsula. Angeline Boulley was a former director of the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education, where she worked to provide support for programs and services that met the educational needs of tribal members and students. She also worked with tribal communities to create a new education department that would serve 10 countries in Michigan and Indiana. During her times as an assistant executive director of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of the Chippewa Indians, she led staff to carry out governmental services for tribal members. Although these are not all the roles in which she has served, we can see that she has changed students' lives through them. She has impacted students' lives through her debut young adult novel as well. Firekeeper's Daughter is a New York Best Times selling novel that takes up themes of citizenship, language revitalization, sexual assault, and coercive presence of drugs on Native communities. This book has been named the Walter D. Myers Award for Outstanding Children's Literature, the Prince Award, the William C. Morris Award for Young Adult Debut Literature, and was an American Indian Youth Literature Award honor book. And then also be on the lookout because this novel will soon be brought to Netflix platforms through President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama's production company, Higher Ground. Angeline and her works have surely impacted many. And then just once more before we bring our guest speaker up, I would like to remind everyone to turn off their phones and be respectful of the space that we have in honor for today. So on behalf of Aquinas College, the Jane Hibbert Enema Women's and Gender Studies Center, and Contemporary Writer Series, please help us welcome the phenomenal, inspiring, peace-bringing, and member of the Michigan community, Angeline Boulley.
So, all right. Okay. Whew. All right. My time. Okay. Get situated. All right. Buju anin Angeline Boulley miskwa makwa kwenidishnakas makwa dodam bawating and donjaba chimagwet. Hello, everyone. I'm Angeline Boulley, Bear Clan, and I'm from the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. And just what an honor to be here with you today. So what I'm going to do, so if I want to see you, I put my glasses on, and when I need to read things, I take them off. So yes, I do need to figure that situation out, but okay. We're going to start off, I'll start out with a reading, a brief one. I am a frozen statue of a girl in the woods. Only my eyes move, darting from the gun to their startled expression. Gun, shock. Gun, disbelief. Gun, fear. The thumb, the thumb, the thumb. The snub-nosed revolver shakes with tiny tremors from the jittery hand aiming at my face. I'm gonna die. My nose twitches at a greasy sweetness, familiar, vanilla and mineral oil, WD-40. Someone used it to clean this gun. More scents, pine, damp moss, skunky sweat, cat pee. The thumb, the thumb, the thumb. The jittery hand makes a hacking motion with the gun, as if wielding a machete instead. Each diagonal slice toward the ground gives me hope. Better a random target than me. But then terror grips my heart again, the gun back at my face. Mom, she won't survive my death. One bullet will kill us both. A brave hand reaches for the gun, fingers outstretched, demanding, give it, now. The thumb, I am thinking of my mother when the blast changes everything. So that's the prologue for my book. So what I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up about an hour and a half away in New Buffalo. I am the middle child of 5 siblings. Like Donis, my father is Ojibwe and my mother is non-native. And also like Donis, I had a non-native grandmother who did not care for Native Americans at all. So, identity, pretty early on, as soon as I became aware of identity, I realized how complicated it can be. So we grew up in a small town, New Buffalo, and every Saturday, so my mom didn't drive, and my dad was a truck driver, and so every Saturday, us kids would follow my mom like a mama duck and the ducklings, and we would walk the mile to town, and we would have to hit the post office and the bank before noon, and then we could go to the library, and then the grocery store, and then if we were really good, we'd go to Jenny's and we could get an ice cream cone. But we weren't always good. But at the library, we could check out as many books as we wanted from whatever section of the library we wanted, as long as we were willing to haul our books in our tote bags. My parents have inspired me with a love of reading and the freedom to choose whatever I wanted to read. So of course I do remember reading Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, but I also remember reading about English royalty, architecture, roses, just very eclectic interests. And every summer we would spend on Sugar Island, which is between Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and Sault, Ontario. And there we would be on Sugar Island. My grandparents had a very rustic home with an outhouse and always a campfire going. And we would spend summers there playing with cousins. And my favorite place in the world to be is on Sugar Island. Well, two important things happened to me when I was a senior at New Buffalo High School. The first is that it was the first time I ever read a book that had a Native main character, and it wasn't until I saw it that I realized the absence of it in my life up to that point. I think it's really important for books for children and teens. Representation is so important, and just seeing yourself in the pages of a book can be a very powerful thing. So I read this book, and now I love everything that Lois Duncan has written, except for that book, which is called Stranger with My Face. I didn't have the words to describe why I felt less than satisfied at the end of the story. But now I know the representation was pretty bad. It relied on a lot of stereotypes and generalizations, and it felt hokey, and it wasn't a positive experience for me. The other important thing that happened to me when I was a senior in high school is that my best friend went to a different school nearby, and she told me about a new boy, senior year, and she thought he might be my type, thought maybe I would want to meet him. I ended up never meeting him because he didn't play sports, and it turned out that he also hung out with the really hardcore partiers, and that was not on brand for me. So I never met him, and then a month before graduation, my friend said that there had been a drug bust in their town, and it turned out that the new boy had been an undercover police officer. And I remembered thinking, all of those years of reading Nancy Drew, I was like, what if we had met? And what if we liked each other? What if he needed my help? Because I could solve a mystery faster than Nancy Drew could. And I was raised on soap operas, like all the CBS soaps, and so I knew about like cliffhangers and red herrings and foreshadowing. So yeah, and so just that idea of why would some undercover drug investigation need the help of an ordinary 18-year-old Ojibwe girl? And that idea has stayed with me for a very long time and is now Firekeeper's daughter. But it took a long time to go from the spark of an idea to a book. And how that happened is I went to college. I was the first person in my family to go away to school. And After graduation, I started working for the Saginaw Chippewa tribe in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and I was a student parent advocate. So I was a liaison. I was a tribal employee, but I worked in the local public school, and I was there to be a liaison between the tribe, the public school, and the students and their families. And I really saw a lot of situations that really made me question how our public schools educate Native Americans and educate the general population about Native Americans. So I saw different situations where maybe a whole group of kids were goofing off, but it would be the Native student that would get pulled aside for disciplinary action. And, other situations. And one time this young man, he was in 8th grade, he finally, got fed up with things and just decided to leave school, like walked to the front door, and the school principal held the door open, and I'm saying, can you come back? We'll figure out how to make this work. We'll do this, do that. And he was like, nope, I'm out of here. And so as we watched this young man walk down the sidewalk, the school principal said, what a shame, so much potential. And I thought, you're literally holding the door open for him to leave. And it really galvanized something in me that I wanted to work in Indian education. So I worked in a number of different tribal communities in Michigan, including my own. So over about a 15, 20-year period, that was what I did. I wrote grants, and I supervised staff. I worked with our public schools. I worked with the tribes. And I would keep thinking about that idea for a story, and it was like putting puzzle pieces in place, maybe building the framework of the puzzle first, and realizing, what if it was an undercover drug investigation on a reservation, a federal drug investigation? And what if it involved a drug that had a recipe that could be manipulated? And what if that recipe was tweaked with something that had a cultural component? And what if that 18-year-old Ojibwe girl, what if she was a whiz in chemistry? And what if she also knew about traditional medicines, plants, and items that we use for healing in our traditional ways? What if she knew her Ojibwe culture and language and was connected to everybody and everything? She actually would be the ideal confidential informant for a federal drug investigation. So, but on my reservation, the feds aren't necessarily the good guys. Sorry, this is the realities. So I needed a compelling situation of why this young person would feel the need to help with an investigation, and then for her to decide very quickly that she was going to run a parallel investigation, parallel to the FBI's, and she would decide what information she was going to share and what information they didn't have a right to. So she was very mindful about indigenous knowledge and protecting that. So finally, I talked about it a little earlier today with a group of students, but I kind of had a midlife crisis, and I was about 44 years old, and I realized that there was probably maybe best case scenario, equal amount of sand in the top of the hourglass and in the bottom, best case, okay. But that if I hadn't accomplished the dreams and goals that I had for myself, what was I waiting for? I wasn't getting any younger. And the sand in the bottom of the hourglass was only gonna get filled up more and more. So I decided to just try. I decided that I could live with failure of trying and not being good at writing, but I didn't want to live with regret of never trying. And so at age 44, I decided to write this novel that had been in my mind bits and pieces of it since I was 18. So I wrote a first draft over a summer, and it was really bad. And but that's what first drafts are supposed to be. And I kept at it. I would take a break, and then I would look at the manuscript and read it with fresh eyes, and I would see what I had done well and what I needed to improve upon, and I would just keep at it. And I did that for 10 years, and I didn't know when I started that it would take that long. When I first started writing, my sons were in high school, and my daughter was a preteen. And I remembered telling her this idea I had for this young woman, and she was gonna kind of be this super sleuth and help out, with this investigation. And my daughter, Sarah, said, "Mom, that sounds really good, like even better than Twilight." And I was like, "Whoa, that's high praise." So I thought, well, she's, I think she was 11 at the time, and I thought, well, it'll take me a year or so to write, and then maybe another year to get an agent, and then another year to have it be. So by the time she's in high school, I'll be finished with this book that she can, read. And I didn't count on when my book did get published, my daughter was a senior in college, so but things take however long they take. So I'm going to read another section of the book. Lily's Jeep screeches into the driveway. Wearing all black as usual, my best friend hops out so I can climb into the back. Granny June sits in the passenger seat, headscarf tied under her chin, dark brown eyes barely peeking over the dashboard. Between tiny Lily and her great-grandmother, it's a wonder either can see the road. Lily's been my best friend since 6th grade when she came to live with Granny June. We look like opposites, and not just because of our height difference. I am so pale, the other Nish kids called me Ghost, and I once overheard someone refer to me as that washed-out sister of Levi's. When Lily lived with her Jaganash dad and his wife, they kept her out of the sun so her reddish-brown skin wouldn't get any darker. We both learned early on that there is an acceptable Anishinaabe skin tone continuum, and those who land on its outer edges have to put up with different versions of the same BS. Lily's smile is outlined in glossy black lipstick. It grows wider as she takes in my outfit, jeans paired with one of my dad's hockey jerseys extending to mid-thigh. Lady Donis in her finest gown, it's my pleasure to drive thee, she bows. I grin, and it feels like when I slip off a backpack loaded with all my school books. I should sit back there. Too much work for you, Granny June says, watching as I flip the driver's seat forward and wedge my nearly 6-foot-tall frame into the back. It's like seeing a baby crawl back into the womb. She says this every time we both hitch a ride with Lily. No way, Granny June, you're the best co-pilot. You do not make an elder accommodate you. You just don't. We often drop Granny June at the Sioux Senior Center on our way to work, depending on what's for lunch. Granny compares the monthly menus for the 2 senior citizen lunch programs, monitoring them as closely as bingo cards during the coverall. If Granny June thinks the Jaganash are getting a better meal, she makes Lily drop her off at the Sioux Senior Center downtown. Otherwise, a tribal van picks her up for the ferry ride to the Nokomis Mishomis Elder Center on Sugar Island for lunch and social activities. Did you do it? Lily gives a knowing glance in the rearview mirror. Yep. Did you use protection? Granny June says. We all laugh, and as Lily turns a corner too quickly, even her tires add a squeal. No, Granny. Donna's told her ma and grandma about not going to U of M. It's official. Lake Superior State University, baby. She does a high-pitched trill out the window, which startles a few tourists on the sidewalk. Lily's tried and failed to teach me how to lily, which some niche women do to call out an accomplishment. Granny June turns to look at me and scowls. I wait for her to tell me to sit up straight. It's what my grandmother would say. My girl, some boats are for the river and some are for the ocean. I think Granny June is right. I just don't know which one I am. So I had this story, and I kept writing and trying to be better at writing. And then finally, I had something that I felt could get published, and it took a long time, a lot of research. So some of my fun research stories. One time, we were living in Sault Ste. Marie. I lived there for about 15 years, and I would wait for my son to get done with hockey practice, and one time I was thinking, would a body fit in the trunk of our car? And so I went out to the parking lot and popped the trunk, and I climbed in and laid, curled up like a little shrimp. And a tribal cop came by and said, "Is everything okay?" And I was like, "I'm doing research." But yeah, I had a number of really interesting research things that happened that I could just lose myself in this research because I wanted to tell a truthful story, a plausible story, and research breathes life into your story. It breathes credibility, rich details. So my book deals with a drug that is rampant, and it's methamphetamine. And I was on some committee in Sault Ste. Marie, and I ended up at Applebee's with the other committee members, and I'm sitting next to this professor, Dr. Aaron Westrick. He's a professor in the fire sciences department there. And I, mentioned that I was writing a book, and most people are like, "Oh, that's nice, next subject, But he said, "Oh, what's it about?" And I said, "Oh, this girl detective, and she's trying to figure out this who's behind a deadly drug and that." And he was really interested. And he got a hold of me afterwards and said, "I have contacts at the Michigan State Police Academy." And I had told him that the story was going to be around meth. And he said, "There's a workshop that's going on next week at the State Police Academy. If I can pull some strings and get you into this class, would you want to go to it?" And I was like, "Absolutely, I would." And so that's what he did, and that's what I did. Got up at 4 a.m. to get on the road and get to Lansing in time for this. It was a workshop on different methods of meth production and how to identify clandestine meth labs. So I learned how to make meth from the Michigan State Police. Yeah. I also had another really great source, and that was when I was living in Washington, D.C. A friend of a friend, Indian country is very small, so in D.C. there are a lot of natives that live and work there, and so I was introduced to a retired FBI agent who's native, and his name is Walt Lamar. And once we established trust, I could ask him anything about being an FBI agent. And so he really shared a lot of knowledge with me. He needs to write a book. He has a lot of stories. And then he introduced me to a retired IRS agent who taught me all about money laundering. And so, you meet these people, and, some people don't want to be acknowledged, but they'll tell you, share good information with you. And other people I'm very happy, I was able to acknowledge in the book. But each draft over that 10-year period, each draft got better, and the story really came together, and I realized it was dressed up like a mystery thriller, but at its heart, it was a story about a young woman coming of age, feeling that she didn't belong either on the reservation or in town, that maybe there were times when she felt she wasn't Native enough, or heard a million times, "Oh, but you don't look Native," or, "Oh, but you're not like those Natives." That othering that happens, and that at the heart, the story was about identity. It was also about grief and loss, and it was about justice, or rather injustice, who gets justice and who doesn't. And so I knew there was something to this story, and I had this epiphany. I was learning about the hero's journey, and that's, if we look at Harry Potter and Star Wars and Black Panther and Moana is my favorite. All of these stories that take this average person that gets this call to adventure, and they enter this unknown world, and they face a series of trials and tribulations. They make friends, gain allies, gain enemies in their quest for something. And then they finally face their true adversary, the actual villain. And whether or not they're successful, sometimes they get what they thought they wanted and realize it wasn't what they truly needed, or vice versa. They don't get what they want, like Rocky. He didn't beat Apollo Creed, but he went the distance and proved that he was a contender and that he deserved to be in that ring. And he got the girl. And so I remember seeing that, and I saw a visual depiction of it, and it was plotted out. It looked like a pizza with 4 slices of pizza and the little plot points around it. And right after that, I happened to see an Ojibwe medicine wheel online, and I saw one. It's by Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, and we have a lot of our teachings through the medicine wheel. So it represents, the 4 cardinal directions: east, south, west, and north. 4 traditional medicines, 4 traditional colors, 4 times of day, the 4 seasons, all of these different teachings, and it's looks like a pizza slice with 4 slices. And I thought, if I put these over each other, I can tell the hero's journey using the medicine wheel as a cultural framework for telling the story from an Indigenous young woman's perspective. And I can have her journey, use it as a framework and impart teachings, because so many young people are distant from their community and from their identity. And I really wanted the book, most of all, to be a beacon and a way of helping people who are disconnected from their Indigenous identity to find their way back. And the story has resonated beyond that. But I think, James Joyce wrote that in the particular we find the universal. And so my story can be this very specific story of this young woman protecting her community, but yet it can resonate with so many other people. So after 10 years of writing and revising, I thought I had a version that could get published, and this sounds a lot easier than what it actually was, but I got an agent within 2 weeks. And I worked on a short revision over the summer with her, and then we went out on submission, which is where my agent sends the manuscript to different editors at publishing houses. And we put the manuscript out on submission on a Thursday, and we got our first offer on Saturday. We ended up getting 12 offers from agents or from editors at publishing houses. And so Within 2 weeks, we had a 12-bidder auction for the publishing rights for my book. And so I sold my book in a two-book deal to Macmillan, working with my dream editor, in excess of $1 million. And yeah. So it's like getting the golden ticket in the publishing world. This does not happen often. And then, but wait, there's more. So 2 weeks after the book auction, there was the same process, but for the film rights. And so there were 8 companies that were interested in optioning my book for either a feature film or for a series. And I had the same conversation with all 8, and I said, representation is one of my core values. And so that means native creative talent, not just in front of the cameras, but it means behind the camera, in the writer's room, and at every level of production. And there was one guy with this one company, and he said, are there even any native screenwriters? And I thought, like, exactly. It's like showing up for a job interview and asking, so what do you do here? Or are these products any good? Like, and I thought, of course there are native screenwriters, and the fact that you don't know means I don't want to do business with you. I'm not going to do Indians 101 with someone who, can't be bothered to, and the response from Higher Ground Productions was the complete opposite. They were like, absolutely, these are the networks of screenwriters that we're tuned into. These are some of the names of people that we'd love to work with. And if you have names that you'd like us to consider, please let us know. And so I sold the rights to my book for a Netflix series with Barack and Michelle Obama's company, Higher Ground. And yeah. So after that phone call that I had with them, my agent called me and she said, I just want to let you know that Higher Ground doesn't move forward unless Barack and Michelle are on board with the project. So President Barack Obama is going to be reading your manuscript this weekend. So then I reread my manuscript that weekend, and every time I would get to a certain parts, I would be like, did President Barack Obama just read my sex scene? Like, but so it's been incredible. My book debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's been on the list for 31 weeks, which is it's incredible, and thank you. And, I'm thrilled and honored, but what this also means, too, is let us not kid ourselves. Publishing is a business. It is overwhelmingly white. And so stories from marginalized peoples and underrepresented voices we have always had incredible storytellers. We just have not gotten the book deals. And so the success of my book, it means a lot to me, but it also means that a very particular book about a specific tribal community can be a commercial and literary success. And it's not anything my publisher ever put on me. It was me thinking, when you're from a community that's underrepresented in publishing, you get one time at bat. And if you don't get on base, it's going to be a very long time before someone else from a community like yours gets another shot at bat. And so the stakes are higher. You don't get multiple chances at bat. And so I'm very thankful for the success of the book, and I hope that it encourages publishing to reach out and to publish more stories by people from communities different than mine, because these stories need to be told, deserve to be told. There's students in classrooms waiting for stories where they can see themselves reflected. So I will read one last thing and then we'll do some question and answer. So Donis is staying over at her Aunt Teddy's house, and she talks with her aunt and uncle, and then she falls asleep on the sofa. Auntie's footsteps on the stairs wake me. It's still dark with even more stars than before. I'm instantly alert at the sound of her voice, low and harsh, whispering through gritted teeth. Where? Tell her not to go anywhere. Yes, I'm on my way. No, you keep her away. Because it's a blanket party, not a murder scene. Damn, I'm on my way. I bolt upright, but Auntie just shoots me a warning look and keeps walking past the sofa. I quickly get up and follow her into the mudroom, my heart pounding. A blanket party is when a guy does something bad to a woman, and her female cousins take him into the woods, rolled in a blanket, and beat the crap out of him. I asked Auntie when I first heard about it. She called it Nishkwe justice. Lily and I made a pact that if either of us finally got to attend one, we'd tell the other about it. Take me with you, I plead, as she rummages for her keys. Lily is usually the one to tell me about res happenings. This would be a chance for me to have something exciting to share with her for once. Auntie's my only entry to Ojibwe ceremonies. Sometimes she brings me to full moon ceremonies, but going with her to a blanket party would mean something different. It would be another way for the other Nishkwewug in my community to see me as part of the Firekeeper family, not just a Fontaine. Plus, what if this party got out of hand and Auntie needed my help? No way. Auntie tucks her cell phone into her bra. But I want to go. I'm surprised at myself. I've never talked back to Auntie. Her word is law. She whirls around and steps toward me, but I stand firm. Auntie glowers. Something shifts in her, energy imploding to simultaneously magnify and focus her anger. The hair on my arms and neck stands on end. This shit is ugly and messed up, and I don't want you anywhere near it. She practically spits in my face. Go to college, snag Jamie, live your nice life. She turns and is gone. I stand there in the dark, hands trembling. Her dismissal stings like a slap across my face. My cousins always tell stories about my aunt's fighting days, tales of fierce Teddy Firekeeper and her legendary shenanigans that grow more hilarious with each retelling. Like the time she was at a bar with friends and some Jaganash guy kept asking each girl if she was Indian and how much Indian was she. He leered at Auntie and asked if she'd show him which body parts were Indian. She throat punched him. While he was gulping for air, my aunt told him he just experienced a real Indian fist, and she had another if he wanted to see that one too. Tonight is the first time I glimpse the scary version of Auntie, and there is nothing funny about it. All right, questions? Do you want to? It helps the people to be able to hear.
Can you hear me okay? Perfect.
Yes.
Welcome to this land. And we are from the same tribe, so it's great to see you here. The first thing I wanted to just mention is, on this particular campus, there is a tree near the old chapel, and it has a bent limb to direct people along the pathway of the road Fulton Street. And it's such an incredible thing because there are not that many in this city. And so what I'm wanting to ask you briefly is, do you have any teaching in the book about how we navigated as Anishinaabe people by following trees that have a bent limb? And so I found it very curious when I was on my morning walk here regularly, thinking about you coming and asking what kind of question would I ask you? And that was, have you ever utilized that particular teaching to help people navigate in the world? And so I just throwing that out there. But it's more akin to our culture to ask that kind of question instead of, gee, how many pencils did you go through writing this book? So that was just a question about basic navigation.
Well, miigwech, Niji. Miigwech. I didn't use that particular teaching, but I am, really familiar with the ways in which we would leave road signs, leave trail markers for people to come along behind us. So, yep. Other questions? Yes. Maybe if the next person with a question, if you want to come up, and that we've got 2 lines going or 2 microphones.
I'm so excited about the TV series coming, and yet when I look online, it's kind of dead. The last news was April 21st, 2021. When's it coming out?
Yeah, I thought publishing was a long game, but book to film is even longer. So really, I wouldn't look for anything until maybe this time next year. So where we're at right now is that we have a showrunner, which is like the main person over everything. And we have a head writer. And the head writer, her name is Winona Wilms, and she is from Red Cliff Band of Ojibwe in Wisconsin. And so where we're at right now is that they're working on the first script. And when Netflix gives the green light on that, then they'll assemble a writer's room. I'm hoping the writer's room is all native, that we've seen with Reservation Dogs, the series, the incredible writing that can happen when you have an all-native writer's room. And so then they'll work on the first season, and then they'll go into production. So, yeah. Yes.
Hi, this is my second time seeing you.
Oh.
When I first saw you in March at Grand Valley, I had a question, but the time was over, so I didn't get to ask it. But I'm a high school librarian, and when I read your book, I looked at our collection, and I thought our Native collection should be improved upon. And I read your book, and I thought, this is the start of something wonderful. And I wondered, who do you read? And what authors do you like to read? Because I would like to carry those kind of books at my high school library.
Yep. Okay, so the question being about having more books like mine
Yes.
in school libraries so that kids can see themselves and others in the pages of a book. So who I'm reading right now, well, my favorite book of all time is The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline, and that is a young adult book. Follows a 14-year-old boy named French who's on the run, and it's set in the near future where something catastrophic has happened and mankind is losing the ability to dream, and only indigenous people can still dream. So while mankind is slowly going insane, they decide they need to round up indigenous people and harvest bone marrow because they think that's where the secret to dreaming is. And this story is everything. It's just everything. So The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline. I also read Marcy Rendon. She's the most underrated Native writer out there. She's finally getting some love. She has a 3-book series right now, a mystery series. It's not young adult, but I wouldn't hesitate to have any high school student read it. Let's see, a lot of the reading that I'm doing lately is, this is the best perk about being an author, is that you get advance copies of books from your favorite authors who want you to blurb their book, like do a little quote, this is the greatest thing. And so you get to read these books before they come out. And so I was able to read Robin Wall Kimmerer, she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Monique Gray Smith has adapted it for young readers, and that book is coming out, and so, yeah, that's really great. And then a book called The Peacekeeper by B.L. Blanchard, and it supposes what if the Americas had never been colonized, but had still developed modern societies and restorative justice, what would that look like? And so, yeah.
Thank you so much. And the other question, comment that I love that your hero was a woman who was tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it took you 11 years to write this book. Did you write it alone, or did you have a writers group that you were a part of, or people to help you along the way?
I mostly did it on my own until towards the end. I got on Twitter, and that's where I started following different Native authors, and then people in publishing. And I heard about this writers' workshop that was going to be just for Native writers. And I had never been to a writers' retreat or a conference or anything like that. And I thought, okay, I think I'm going to go to this one. And it was Loonsong Turtle Island, and it was in upstate Minnesota. And I felt like I found my group, my people, because the few times I had tried to go to a writers group, I felt like I spent most of the time not on my writing, but explaining about my community and, well, why doesn't your character have more agency? Well, why doesn't this, why did that, and feeling like you had to justify your existence and the way your community is before you could even get into talking about the writing. And so being in this writer's retreat for 4 days, it was like we got that shorthand already. We didn't have to spend our time validating our identities to each other. We could focus on the craft, and that was incredible.
That's beautiful. Do you still write with them? Or stay in contact with them at least?
Yeah, I stay in contact with them.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I know that we spoke briefly before you, so I'm also a member of the Sioux tribe. And if you're willing to share, I grew up in the 60s and 70s in St. Ignace. It wasn't vogue being an Indian. When I read your book, I immediately connected to it. I have an Indian father, a non-Indian mother, so I connected immediately with that. I actually heard my Indian grandmother's voice in your book. So, thank you.
Miigwech.
I grew up disconnected from my culture. So I was wondering if you would be willing to share some of your experiences growing up about either being connected or disconnected with the Indian culture in that era.
Yeah. Well, my dad is a dark-skinned Ojibwe man, and growing up in Sault Ste. Marie in the 40s and 50s, it was rough. It was rough to be indigenous, and he left the area and joined the Navy when he was a young man, and but we always had a connection with our family there. So I always knew I was Ojibwe, and I was always proud of that. But then when we would visit our cousins in the Sioux, their experience about being Ojibwe was different than mine. And a lot of it was skin color. It seemed like the darker you were, the worse your experiences were and how you were treated. So that's kind of where that acceptable Anishinaabe skin tone continuum thing kind of came from, was seeing the way that, that can relate. And now dealing with blood quantum and dealing with all these other identity issues, I just really wanted to write a story where people would feel seen. Miigwech.
So in these 10 or 11 years, I've read somewhere that you've had 60 or so rough drafts. Or-
No.
No?
No, I probably had about 8.
8? Okay.
8.
So 8 main rough drafts. In those, what were the main things that you looked over and said, maybe this isn't what I'm going for? And how would you give advice to beginning writers on what to look for and what to avoid at all costs?
Sure. That's a great question. So I always kind of knew the beginning of the story, and I knew how I wanted it to end, and I knew who one of the villains was going to be. But everything else, I kind of like would try out different things. And so pretty much everybody in the story got a turn at being a villain. And sometimes that version of the draft worked, and other times it didn't. And so, and there were other people that I intended on having them be villains, and then I just couldn't bring myself to it at the last, minute. So it's like trying different things, and I think I had a version where I wrote one draft where I was determined that Donis was not going to like Jamie at all, that she wasn't going to want anything to do with him romantically. And those crazy kids couldn't stay apart. Like, it's just... Yeah, sometimes your characters are telling you the story, and it's not the story you thought you were writing. Sometimes it takes you, and what's the harm in following that and seeing where it goes? Because in my experience, sometimes the story is bigger than you, and I started to trust in following that kind of wild idea out there and seeing and thinking maybe there was a reason, that it came to me like that. And I think that a lot of the great things that developed in the story were because of that, trusting the character and what they were telling me, or this idea that I couldn't let go of, and just seeing what happened with it. And so I think there is magic and beauty in writing and not being in control of every single aspect.
Thank you.
With that said, can I ask you about the little people? And what was your inspiration, and where did they come from? We read this book for a book club, an adult book club, and one of the things that was said to me, I just believed in it. I was absorbed in the story, and I'm a former English teacher, retired, and someone said, how did you just believe? And I'm like, well, they were there. Why wouldn't you believe? So what was the inspiration for the little people?
Well, we have stories about the little people. They're spirit beings, and, they're real. And the interesting thing is that if you talk with other people from indigenous cultures around the world, you see that they have stories about little people also, spirit beings. And and then the story that I reference in there about the elderly man who, when he was a young boy, was lost in the woods for 2 days, and when they found him, he was fine, and he said that the little people took care of him. That's my grandma's cousin, and so, it's not folklore to us or myth. It's like these are stories that we all have stories about this. So, yeah.
I actually have two questions. The first question I have is regarding your children. Did they read the book, and what were their critiques?
My daughter is my #1 fan, and so she has read this book and the next book, and she is just so supportive. I am a person who loves reading, and I have 2 sons who are reluctant readers, and so I honestly don't know if my sons have ever read my book. I know that one son listened to half of it on audio, and that was only because I was in the car with them for a long trip, and I put my audio book in, and so I know he's heard half of it. So, yeah. But they're very proud. They're very proud of me.
It's ironic because my second question is about your audio version. So I read the book, but I'm a non-native speaker. So therefore, when I got to those words, I just skipped over them. And I thought, oh, I wonder how they sound. So I asked friends who were also audiobook aficionados to listen to it, and they said, oh, they had a native speaker. So I'm wondering, how does that all work together?
Yeah. Well, usually debut authors don't get to have a lot of sway with certain decisions, but Macmillan has really just done so well by me. They knew that I really wanted an Indigenous narrator, and so they put out this casting call for Indigenous narrators, no experience needed, and I was able to listen to all of the 5-minute audio samples, and the instant I heard Isabella Starr LeBlanc, I thought, this is it, this is her. And she read a couple of scenes, so her Donis was like how Donis sounded in my head. But then she read that scene with Granny June and Lily, and her Granny June cadences were like spot on. So and then we worked so hard. We worked with Dr. Margaret Noden at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee on the pronunciations of the words and the spelling, because you can either spell Ojibwe words phonetically, which is how my dad does it, or you can use this double vowel system. And I decided to use the double vowel system because it standardizes spelling and pronunciation, and then my book could be used as a supplemental text in Ojibwe language courses if it used that system. But my dad is still mad at me about not going with the phonetic spelling, because that's what he knows. And then my publisher did want me to include a glossary, and I pushed back on it. I felt like a glossary took it out of a native gaze and centered it in a non-native. And so I felt like if I did a good enough job with the story, that the words would flow organically, and that you'd be able to figure out the meanings through context. So we worked so hard to make sure that all the Ojibwe words were pronounced correctly, and then I was listening to the final cut, and Isabella mispronounced pasty as pasty, and I was like, oh my God, oh my God. So I called my agent, and I was like, we have a problem. And she's like, okay, let me see what we can do. So she gets back on the phone with me, a half hour later, and she goes, okay, the hard copy CDs are already being produced in China. We can't stop that, But Macmillan is willing to ship the recording equipment back out to Isabella. She lived in Minneapolis, for her to re-record. Is it worth that expense for 5 uses of the word? And I said, you do not understand. I cannot hold my head up north of the Mackinac Bridge if this book says pasty. I was like, and you don't understand my cousins, like, they're ruthless. My nickname for the rest of my life will be pasty. And the other thing too is that usually debut authors don't get input in the cover, but I just have to give a shout out. My cover is the most beautiful book cover I've ever seen. My publisher knew that I really wanted an Ojibwe artist, and so they researched, and they had like a short list of names that they were thinking, and they picked Moses Lunham. He's from Kettle and Stony Point First Nation, Ontario, and he read a version of the manuscript and came up with this beautiful, this beautiful book cover. Yep.
Hi, so I have a question about the revision process. And you said you had 8 rough drafts. What tactics did you use to enhance the scene, enhance the dialogue, and enhance the Michigan Native American experience?
Each time I would start a whole new draft, and it was hard because, there was beautiful language in earlier drafts, but the good thing is that, especially if you write on a computer, you just park it into a file and it's never completely gone. It's there. But I just I taught myself a lot. I would read a lot of books about the craft of writing, but I would read my favorite authors and rediscover why I loved them and what it was about their voice that was so unique in storytelling. But I would just, each time, like maybe my outline would be a little more fully fleshed out. And I would just keep at it and then be honest with myself when I got done about what I needed to improve upon, whether it was learning how to write more natural dialogue. Dialogue is supposed to serve a purpose. It's got to be there to tell you something about the character, something to move the plot forward, or, you know, to share information. And so if it's not doing one of those things, then, you know. So just kind of learning those types of things, it's, yeah. Just keep at it. That's the only way. Writing is like a muscle, and the only way you get stronger is by flexing it.
Thank you.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Leo Pontiac. I'm a member of Little Traverse Bay Band of Wadawwa Indians. And I work for the Nauslipi Huron Band of Potawatomis. I work with the elders, and we read your book during the book club, which we created during COVID. And really enjoyed it. But I had a question. You share so much in the book. Do you get any negative feedback from members of your community about, or other natives about sharing too much in it?
I have gotten, not from my community. I made a decision early on that I wasn't going to share about actual ceremony. But I did get like a reader who reached out to me on social media, and she was like, man, you Northern Indians, you give too much away. And that I was telling things that in her, you know, community, they never would have shared that. So I think each community and each writer, they draw that line differently of where they pull that curtain. And so I tried to be very mindful when I was writing. I wrote freely, but then when I would revise and edit, I would think about what I was including in the story and, you know, was I comfortable with that? Because I expected community members to ask me about that very question. So,
Miigwech.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say on the behalf of our campus-wide community, thank you so much. And if I may encourage everyone to give a last applause, because